Imagine stumbling upon a tarnished silver locket in your grandmother's attic. Its clasp hiding a faded photo and a cryptic note that hints at a long-buried family scandal. Would you dare unlock its secrets, or let the past stay hidden? Chapter 1. The Arrival in St. Mary Mead. Let me take you back to the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, where the days drift by like lazy clouds over the English countryside. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone's business, or at least they think they do. Our story begins on a crisp autumn morning in 1952. With the leaves turning shades of gold and red and the air carrying that fresh, earthy scent that promises rain later in the day, Miss Jane Marple, that sharp-eyed elderly lady with a knack for spotting trouble where others see only tea parties and garden gossip, was sitting in her cozy cottage by the window, knitting a soft woolen scarf for her nephew Raymond's little boy. She had just poured herself a cup of Earl Grey when a knock echoed through the door firm. Insistent, not the casual rap of a neighbor dropping by for a chat, Miss Marple set down her needles and rose slowly, her joints protesting just a bit. After all those years of quiet observation, she opened the door to find a young woman standing there, perhaps in her late 20s, with wide blue eyes that held a mix of desperation and determination. Her hair was windswept, as if she'd hurried from the train station without pausing to tidy up, and she clutched a small leather suitcase in one hand. "Miss Marple," the woman asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm Eliza Thornton. Wrote to you last week. You said I could come." "Ah, yes." Miss Marple remembered the letter now it had arrived amid her usual pile of correspondence from friends and distant relatives. Lisa had written about a family matter, something vague but urgent, involving an inheritance and whispers. Of foul play? Miss Marple had replied politely, inviting her for tea, because that's how these things often started, over tea, with secrets spilling out like crumbs from a biscuit. "Come in, my dear," Miss Marple said warmly, ushering Eliza into the sitting room. "You look chilled to the bone. Let me get you a cuppa, and then you can tell me all about it." As they settled into the armchairs by the fire, Eliza fidgeted with the hem of her coat, her fingers twisting nervously. Miss Marple noticed the details right away. The young woman's nails were neatly manicured but bitten at the edges, a sign of recent stress, and there was a faint smudge of ink on her cuff. "Perhaps from writing hasty notes. It's about my aunt, Lady Victoria Hargrove," Eliza began, her words tumbling out in a rush. "She passed away 2 months ago at Hargrove Manor, just outside the village here. The doctor said it was her heart, but I don't believe it. She was healthy as a horse, always riding and gardening. And then there's this." Oh, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver locket, dangling it from a delicate chain. It was antique, with intricate engravings of vines and flowers, a tiny clasp that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with that familiar curiosity. "May I?" she asked, and Eliza handed it over. The locket felt cool and heavy in Miss Marple's palm, heavier than it looked, as if it carried the weight of untold stories. She gently pried it open, revealing 2 compartments. One held a faded photograph of a stern-looking man in Edwardian attire, and the other a lock of dark hair tied with a ribbon. But what caught Miss Marple's attention was the engraving inside the lid, teeny letters that read, "To V. With eternal love, but beware the shadow of betrayal. E. 1925. "Eliza, this is quite intriguing," Miss Marple said, closing the locket, with a soft click. "Tell me more about your aunt. Who is this E? And why do you suspect something amiss with her death?" Eliza took a sip of tea, steadying herself. "Aunt Victoria was the matriarch of our family, you see. She inherited Hargrove Manor from her father, Lord Edmund Hargrove. Back in the 1930s, she never married, always said she preferred her independence. But there were rumors, old family tales about a lost love, a scandal that drove her to seclusion. The locket was hers. I found it hidden in her jewelry box after the funeral. The will left everything to me, her only niece. But my cousin Reginald, he's always been jealous, claiming the estate should be his as the male heir. He's been poking around the manor, asking questions about Aunt Victoria's last days." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, her mind already piecing together the threads. "I don't know Thornton." She'd heard of him through village gossip. A flashy young man with expensive tastes and a habit of running up debts. St. Mary Mead wasn't far from Hargrove. Manor and news traveled fast along the hedgerows. And the circumstances of her death? Miss Marple prompted gently. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. She was found in her study, slumped over her desk. The doctor, old Dr. Haydock from the village, said it was a heart attack, natural causes. But I noticed things out of place papers, scattered, a window ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. And the locket, it wasn't on her. It was tucked away in a secret drawer. Why hide it if she wore it every day? As Eliza spoke, Miss Marple's thoughts wandered to similar cases she'd encountered before. People often underestimated the quiet power of objects like this locket, silent witnesses to passions and betrayals long forgotten. My dear, these old families have layers, like onions, Miss Marple said with a small smile. Peel one back, and you find another. Perhaps we should visit Hargrove Manor together. I'd like to see the place for myself. Lisa brightened at the suggestion. Would you? Oh, that would mean the world to me. Reginald is staying there now, overseeing the estate until the probate clears. But be warned, he's charming on the surface. But I don't trust him. The two women finished their tea, and Miss Marple suggested they take a walk to the manor that afternoon while the light was still good. As they stepped out into the village lane, the sun peeked through the clouds, casting long shadows over the thatched roofs and flower gardens. St. Mary Mead seemed peaceful, but Miss Marple knew better underneath the calm currents of human nature swirled, full of greed, love, and secrets waiting to surface. They passed the vicarage, where the Reverend Clement waved hello, and the post office, where Dolly Bantry was chatting with the clerk about the latest London news. Everyone here seems so ... normal, Eliza remarked. It's hard to imagine anything sinister happening nearby. Ah, but that's the thing about villages, Miss Marple replied conversationally. The most ordinary places hide the most extraordinary stories. Take Mrs. Prisridley next door. She once solved a missing cat mystery that turned out to involve a stolen brooch. People are the same everywhere, my dear, full of surprises. As they approached the outskirts of the village, Hargrove Manor came into view, a grand old house of red brick and ivy, with tall chimneys and mullioned windows that reflected the fading light. It stood on a gentle hill, surrounded by manicured lawns and a winding driveway lined with oak trees. But even from a distance, Miss Marple sensed an air of neglect. Weeds creeping into the flower beds, shutter hanging loose. They were greeted at the door by the housekeeper, Mrs. Croft, a stout woman in her 50s, with a no-nonsense expression. Miss Eliza, back so soon? And who's this? She asked, eyeing Miss Marple. This is Miss Marple, a friend, Eliza explained. She's here to help with ... family matters.
F.
Mrs. Croft nodded curtly and led them into the hall, where polished wood floors creaked underfoot and portraits of stern ancestors gazed down from the walls. Mr. Reginald is in the library, she said. Shall I fetch him? Before Eliza could answer, a tall man in his 30s emerged from a side door, dressed in a tweed jacket and holding a brandy glass. His smile was wide and welcoming, but Miss Marple noted the tightness around his eyes, a sign of calculation, perhaps. Eliza, and you must be the famous Miss Marple. I've heard tales of your detective prowess from Aunt Victoria herself. Come in, tea. Or something stronger. They settled in the library, a room filled with leather-bound books and the faint smell of pipe tobacco. Reginald lounged in an armchair, crossing his legs casually. So, what brings you here, cousin? Sorting out the will already? His tone was light, but there was an edge to it. Eliza glanced at Miss Marple before speaking. Sure, Reginald. We're here about Aunt Victoria's locket, the silver one. Do you know anything about it? Reginald's expression flickered for a moment's surprise, or something more. That old thing. She was sentimental about it, but I never paid much mind. Why? Miss Marple interjected softly. It seems to hold a message from the past, Mr. Thornton. Something about betrayal. Does that ring any bells? Reginald laughed, a bit too loudly. Betrayal? Sounds like one of those Gothic novels Aunt loved. It's probably from her youth. She had a beau back in the 20s. Some chap named Edward who vanished. Family legend says he ran off with a maid or something? harmless stuff. But Miss Marple wasn't convinced. As they toured the manor, she observed the study where Lady Victoria had died. The desk still bore faint ink stains, and a drawer was slightly askew. Was anything missing after her death? She asked Mrs. Croft later, when Reginald was out of earshot. The housekeeper hesitated. Well, miss, there was her diary. Gone clean from the shelf. And that locket, she always kept it close. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple and Eliza bid farewell and walked back to the village. What do you think? Eliza asked eagerly.
Yes.
Reginald. Seems smooth, but there's more to him, Miss Marple mused. And that locket eats the key. We need to dig into the past, find out who he was. Little did they know, as they strolled away, a figure watched from an upstairs window, fingers tightening on the curtain. This wraps up our first dive into the mystery, setting the scene in St. Mary Mead and introducing the players. Stick around for Chapter 2, where we uncover the Hargrove family history and a surprising twist from 1925. Chapter 2. Shadows of the past. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak table where she sat with Eliza Thornton. The silver locket lay between them, glinting faintly, as if it held secrets eager to spill. Lisa sipped her tea, her brow furrowed, while Miss Marple's nimble fingers traced the locket's engravings, her mind already turning over the clues from their visit to Hargrove Manor the previous day. Reginald's too-smooth charm, the missing diary, the ajar drawer, and Lady Victoria's study, all pieces of a puzzle that didn't yet fit. But Miss Marple knew the past often held the key to the present, and today they would start peeling back the layers of the Hargrove family's history. Eliza, my dear, Miss Marple began, her voice gentle but firm. To understand this locket and your aunt's death, we need to know more about this E from 1925. You mentioned a family scandal, something about a lost love. Tell me everything you know about your aunt's early years. Eliza set down her cup, her blue eyes distant as she sifted through memories and half-heard stories. Aunt Victoria was in her 20s back then, she said. The family was wealthy, but not without their dramas. My grandmother, her sister, used to say Victoria was headstrong, always riding horses or sneaking off to dances in London. There was a man, Edward Langley, who courted her. Everyone thought they'd marry, but then he disappeared, and Victoria shut herself away at the manor. The family whispered about betrayal, but no one ever gave me details. It was like they wanted to forget. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to her own village experiences. Young love, especially in old families like the Hargroves, often came with complications, jealousy, rivalries, or secrets buried under politeness. And this Edward, she prompted. What became of him? Eliza shook her head. No one knows. Some said he ran off to America. Others thought he got mixed up in something shady and left to avoid disgrace. Aunt Victoria never spoke of him, but she kept that locket close, always. One found a few old letters in her desk once, signed E, but they were just fragment stock, of promises and heartbreak. I didn't think much of it until now. The mention of letters piqued Miss Marple's interest. Fragments, you say? We should look at those. And the manor's library might hold more old records, perhaps, or family papers. Let's pay another visit. Eliza agreed, and after breakfast, they set off for Hargrove Manor. The autumn air crisp, and the village quiet, except for the chatter of sparrows. As they walked, Miss Marple observed the world around her. Mr. Hodges, the baker, sweeping his doorstep. Young Tommy Pierce riding his bicycle too fast down the lane. Ordinary life, but she knew ordinary often masked the extraordinary at the manor. Mrs. Croft greeted them with her usual brisk efficiency, though her eyes lingered on the locket Eliza wore around her neck. Back again, Miss Eliza? Mr. Reginald's gone into town, but you're welcome to look around. Miss Marple caught the housekeeper's slight hesitation. Mrs. Croft knew more than she let on, perhaps about the diary or the locket's history. Thank you, Mrs. Croft, Miss Marple said kindly. We'd like to explore the library if that's all right. Old family papers might help settle some estate matters. The housekeeper nodded, but her lips tightened. She bustled off to the kitchen. The library was a grand room, its high shelves packed with leather-bound volumes and dusty ledgers. A large mahogany desk sat by a window overlooking the gardens, and a faint, musty smell hung in the air, mingling with the scent of old wax polish. Eliza began sorting through a pile of papers on a side table, while Miss Marple scanned the shelves for anything dated around 1925. Families like the Hargroves always keep records. She murmured, births, deaths, marriages, even scandals. If you know where to look. Her fingers brushed over a row of estate journals, thick books filled with neat handwriting about crop yields and household expenses. One, labeled 1923 to 1926, caught her eye. She pulled it down and opened it, the pages crackling with age. The entries were mundane at first: repairs to the stables, a new gardener hired, but then tucked between two pages. She found a folded letter, its edges yellowed. It was addressed to my dearest Victoria and signed Edward. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. "Eliza, come look at this," she called softly. Eliza hurried over, and together they read the letter. It was dated June 1925, written in a hurried, slanting hand. "Victoria, my love, I cannot stay. The truth about your brother's dealings will ruin us both if I remain. Meet me at the Oak Grove tonight, and we'll decide our future. Forgive me." Eliza gasped. Her brother. It would be my grandfather, Charles Hargrove. He died years ago, but what dealings? Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Something serious enough to drive Edward away. Let's see if there's more. They searched further, finding a small box hidden behind a row of novels. Inside were more, letters all from Edward Langley, each more desperate than the last. One mentioned Charles's debts and a dangerous man in London who demanded repayment. Another hinted at a confrontation. "Your brother threatens me, Victoria. He says I'll regret crossing him. I only want to protect you." Pieces were falling into place, but the picture was still blurry. Miss Marple tucked the letters into her handbag for safekeeping. "These suggest a scandal tied to your grandfather," she said. "Perhaps he was involved in something unsavory, gambling. Or worse. If Edward left because of it, the Locket's inscription about betrayal makes sense. But how does this connect to your aunt's death?" Eliza looked troubled. Could Reginald know about this? He's always been obsessed with the family legacy, saying Charles was cheated out of his inheritance. Maybe he found something in Aunt Victoria's papers. As they continued searching, a creak from the hallway made them freeze. Mrs. Croft appeared, carrying a tray of tea things, but her expression was guarded. "Thought you might need refreshment," she said, setting the tray down. Picked. Miss Marple thanked her, noting the housekeeper's quick glance at the desk where the journal had been. "Mrs. Croft," she said casually, "do you remember anything? About Lady Victoria's youth? A gentleman named Edward Langley, perhaps?" The housekeeper's hands paused on the tray. "Edward? That was ages ago. A charming lad, but he broke her ladyship's heart. Ran off, they said, caused quite a stir." She hesitated, then added, "Some thought he stole from the family, but I never believed it. He seemed devoted to her." Miss Marple smiled, filing away the housekeeper's words. Mrs. Croft's loyalty to the family was clear, but so was her discomfort. "Thank you, Mrs. Croft. You've been most helpful." After the housekeeper left, Eliza whispered, "She's hiding something, isn't she?" Miss Marple nodded. "People often are, my dear. But they leave clues in what they don't say. As much as what they do." They spent another hour in the library, finding an old photograph album with a picture of a young Victoria, radiant in a summer dress, standing beside a handsome man with dark hair and a shy smile. Word, no doubt. The album also held a clipping from a 1925 newspaper, small notice about a local gentleman, Mr. Edward Langley, leaving for Canada under sudden circumstances. Miss Marple's mind raced. Had Edward fled because of Charles Hargrove's threats? And had Victoria kept the locket as a reminder of love or of something darker? As they prepared to leave, Eliza noticed a small key tucked inside the album, its head engraved with a tiny H. "This must be from the manor," she said. "Maybe it opens something, a drawer, a box." Miss Marple agreed. Well, keep it safe and see what it unlocks. For now, let's return to the cottage and think this over. The past is speaking to us, Eliza, but we need to listen carefully. They left the manor as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the lawn. Miss Marple felt the weight of the letters in her handbag, each one a whisper from 1925. Edward Langley's disappearance, Charles Hargrove's mysterious dealings, and the Locket's warning of betrayal, all threads in a tapestry she was determined to unravel. But as they passed the oak grove mentioned in Edward's letter, a chill ran through her. Someone had been watching them in the library. She was sure of it. The question was, who? And what did they fear she'd find? Chapter 3. The Key to the Past. The late afternoon light bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden glow as Miss Marple and Eliza Thornton walked back to the cottage. The small engraved key from the photograph album tucked safely in Eliza's pocket. The air was cool, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. The village hummed with its usual rhythm. Mrs. Weatherby gossiping outside the post office, dog barking in the distance. But Miss Marple's mind was far from the tranquil scene. The letters from Edward Langley, the newspaper clipping about his sudden departure, and the Locket's cryptic inscription swirled in her thoughts like leaves caught in a breeze. The key, she suspected, might unlock more than a drawer. It might open a door to the truth about Lady Victoria's death. Back at the cottage, Miss Marple settled into her favorite armchair, her knitting needles clicking softly as she thought. Aloud, Eliza, that key you found is significant. The H suggests it's tied to the Hargrove family, perhaps to a private place where your aunt kept her most personal things. We need to return to the manor and find what it opens. Eliza, sitting across from her with the locket in her hands, nodded eagerly. I was thinking the same. Aunt Victoria had a habit of hiding things, letters, jewelry, even her diary. There's a locked box in her bedroom I never could open. Maybe this is the key. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. It's very likely, my dear, but we must be discreet. If someone was watching us in the library yesterday, and I'm certain someone was, they may not take kindly to our snooping. Eliza's face paled. You think it was Reginald? Miss Marple tilted her head. Possibly, or Mrs. Croft, or even someone else in the household. Secrets like these make people nervous, and nervous people do foolish things. They decided to visit Hargrove Manor again the next morning, when Reginald was likely to be out. Miss Marple suggested they bring along Dolly Bantry, a dear friend and the wife of Colonel Bantry, who lived at Gossington Hall nearby. Dolly has a knack for distracting people, Miss Marple said with a smile. She'll keep Mrs. Croft busy while we search.
Eliza
agreed, though she looked anxious, twisting the locket's chain around her finger. What if we find something dangerous? She asked. Miss Marple's expression softened. The truth can be unsettling, but it's better than living with shadows. Now, let's have a quiet evening and plan our approach. The next morning, they met Dolly Bantry at the village green. Dolly was a cheerful woman in her 50s, with a penchant for bright scarves and an infectious laugh. Jane, you old sleuth, what have you dragged me into now? She teased as they walked toward the manor. Miss Marple explained the situation briefly, mentioning the locket, the letters, and the mysterious key. Dolly's eyes widened. Sounds like one of those detective novels I devour. Count me in. I'll charm the socks off that housekeeper. Hargrove Manor. Mrs. Croft opened the door, her expression a mix of surprise and suspicion. Miss Marple, Miss Eliza, and Mrs. Bantry. Quite the gathering. Dolly beamed. Oh, I couldn't resist a peek at this lovely old house. I was telling Arthur just yesterday how we must invite you all for tea at Gossington. Do you bake, Mrs. Croft? Love your recipe for scones. As Dolly launched into a lively conversation, steering the housekeeper toward the kitchen, Miss Marple and Eliza slipped upstairs to Lady Victoria's bedroom. The room was elegant but somber, with heavy velvet curtains and a four-poster bed covered in a faded quilt. A mahogany dressing table stood by the window, its surface cluttered with perfume bottles and a silver hairbrush. Liza pointed to a small wooden box on a shelf, its lid carved with the same vine pattern as the locket. That's it, she whispered. I tried opening it before, but it's always been locked. Miss Marple examined the box, noting a tiny keyhole shaped like the key Eliza carried. "Let's see if it fits," she said. Eliza inserted the key, and with a soft click, the lock turned. The lid creaked open, revealing a velvet-lined interior. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon, a small velvet pouch, and a leather-bound notebook. Eliza's hands trembled as she reached for the notebook. "This must be her diary," she said. Miss Marple nodded, her sharp eyes scanning the room for any sign of disturbance. The air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. They opened the diary to a page dated July 1925. Lady Victoria's handwriting was elegant but hurried. "Edward is gone. Charles admitted everything, his debts to that awful man in London, the threats he made to Edward. I begged him to stop, but he says it's for the family's honor. I cannot forgive him. The locket is all I have left of what might have been." Eliza's voice caught as she read aloud. "My grandfather drove Edward away. That's awful. Poor Aunt Victoria." Miss Marple patted her hand.
"Explains the betrayal?"
"In the locket's inscription. But there's more here." "Oh, the letters." "Were from Edward, written after he left for Canada. They were filled with longing and regret, promising to return when it was safe. One mentioned a document he'd hidden where the oak meets the stone, a cryptic phrase that puzzled them both. The velvet pouch held a single pearl earring, its partner missing, and a folded note in Victoria's hand. "For if you ever return?" Miss Marple's mind raced. The oak grove from Edward's letter, was there a stone there? Perhaps a hiding place. Before they could explore further, a shadow moved in the doorway. They turned to see Reginald. His face flushed, and his eyes narrowed. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded, stepping into the room. Eliza clutched the diary, and Miss Marple stood calmly, her presence steadying. "Just sorting through some of your aunt's things, Mr. Thornton," she said smoothly. "Eliza. Found a key, and we thought it might help settle the estate." Reginald's gaze flicked to the open box, and for a moment his composure slipped. "That old junk? You're wasting your time. Aunt Victoria was sentimental, nothing more." Miss Marple noticed his clenched fist, the slight tremor in his voice. "Perhaps," she said lightly, "but old things often tell stories. Do you know anything about an oak grove and a stone?" Reginald's eyes widened briefly before he laughed. "Fairy tales, Miss Marple? You've been reading too many mysteries. If you'll excuse me, I have business in town." He turned and left his footsteps echoing down the hall. Eliza exhaled. "He's nervous, isn't he?" Miss Marple nodded. "It's very. He knows more than he's letting on. I suspect he's looking for something, perhaps the same document Edward mentioned." They gathered the diary, letters, and pouch, locking the box again and slipping the key into Eliza's pocket. As they descended the stairs, Dolly was still chatting with Mrs. Croft, who seemed both exasperated and charmed. "Time to go, Dolly," Miss Marple called. "Thank you, Mrs. Croft, for your hospitality." Outside, the three women walked toward the oak grove near the manor's boundary, a cluster of ancient trees where a low stone wall marked the edge of the property. Miss Marple examined the area, her eyes sharp for any clue. "Look for anything unusual," she said. Lisa spotted a large, flat stone embedded in the ground, half covered by moss. "Could this be it?" she asked. They knelt and brushed away, the dirt revealing a faint carving, a heart with the initials V and E. Miss Marple's heart quickened. This is the place. But we'll need tools to dig properly. Let's return tomorrow. As they headed back to the village, the sky darkened with gathering clouds. Miss Marple felt a prickle of unease. Reginald's reaction, the hidden letters, the carved stone all, pointed to a secret worth killing for. And somewhere in Hargrove Manor, someone was watching their every move, waiting for a chance to keep the past buried. Chapter 4. Beneath the oak, the morning mist clung to the fields around St. Mary Mead, softening the outlines of hedgerows and rooftops as Miss Marple, Eliza Thornton, and Dolly Bantry made their way back to Hargrove Manor. The air was damp and the ground squelched under their sensible shoes. Miss Marple's mind was sharp, focused on the carved stone they'd found in the oak grove the previous day, the heart with V and E etched into it. Coupled with Edward Langley's letter about a document hidden where the oak meets the stone, suggested a secret buried perhaps literally decades ago. Lisa carried a small gardening trowel borrowed from Miss Marple's shed, her face set with determination.
Ow.
While Dolly chattered about the village fete to keep their spirits light, "Jane, if we find buried treasure, I insist on a share for my Rose Garden Fund," Dolly teased, though her eyes darted nervously toward the manor's looming silhouette at the manor. They were careful to avoid drawing attention. Mrs. Croft was in the kitchen, judging by the clatter of pans, and Reginald's car was absent from the driveway. Stroke of luck, Miss Marple noted, as his sudden appearance yesterday had left her wary. "Let's move quickly," she whispered, leading the way to the oak grove. The ancient trees stood like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches swaying slightly in the breeze. The flat stone lay where they'd left it, half hidden by moss, its carved heart barely visible in the dim light. Eliza knelt and began scraping away the earth with the trowel, her hands steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "Do you think it's still here, whatever Edward hid?" she asked. Miss Marple crouched beside her, her knees protesting, but her curiosity undimmed. If Edward went to the trouble of hiding something, he meant it to be found by the right person, your aunt, perhaps, or you. Dolly kept watch, glancing back toward the manor for any sign of movement. The soil was loose, damp from recent rain, and after a few minutes of digging, Eliza's trowel struck something hard. She brushed away the dirt to reveal a small metal box, rusted but intact, its lid sealed with a simple latch. "This is it," Eliza breathed, lifting it carefully from the ground. The box was no larger than a biscuit tin, its surface etched with faint scratches, as if it had been buried in haste. They retreated to a nearby bench hidden by the grove's thick foliage to examine their find. Miss Marple's nimble fingers worked the latch, which gave way with a reluctant creak. Inside, wrapped in faded oilcloth, was a bundle of papers tied with twine. Eliza untied it, revealing a series of documents, a handwritten letter, a legal contract, and a few grainy photographs. The letter, in Edward's familiar scrawl, was dated August 1925, a month after his last note to Victoria. It read, "My darling, if you find this, know I never meant to leave you. Charles's debts to Mr. Carver in London forced my hand. He threatened my life, and yours, if I stayed. This contract proves his fraud. Keep it safe. I'll return when I can. Forever yours, Edward." Elisa's eyes widened as she read the contract. It was an agreement between Charles Hargrove, Victoria's brother, and a man named Vincent Carver, detailing a loan of £5,000, a staggering sum in 1925 with the manor as collateral. The terms were predatory with exorbitant interest rates. And a note in the margin, in Charles's hand, acknowledged falsified estate records to secure the deal. "Grandfather forged documents?" Eliza said, her voice shaking. "You risked the manor to pay off debts?" Miss Marple nodded gravely. "It seems so." And Edward, knowing the truth, became a threat. That's why he fled. The photographs were more puzzling. One showed Charles and a stern-looking man, presumably Vincent Carver, shaking hands outside a London office. Another captured Victoria and Edward in the oak grove, laughing, their hands entwined. A third, creased and faded, showed a young woman in a maid's uniform, her face partially obscured by a hat, standing near the manor's gate. "Who's this?" Dolly asked, peering over Eliza's shoulder. Miss Marple studied the image closely. "Perhaps the maid Reginald mentioned, the one Edward supposedly ran off with, but I'm not so sure that story holds water." As they wrapped the documents back in the oilcloth, a twig snapped nearby, sharp and deliberate. Dolly gasped, and Miss Marple's hands shot up, signaling silence. They crouched behind the bench, hearts pounding as footsteps crunched closer. Through the trees they glimpsed a figure, Mrs. Croft, her apron fluttering as she scanned the grove. "Miss Eliza, are you out here?" she called, her voice tight with something more than concern. Miss Marple whispered, "Stay low." She didn't see us. After a tense moment, Mrs. Croft turned back toward the manor, muttering to herself. "That was too close," Eliza said, clutching the box. "Why is she looking for us?" Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "She may suspect we've found something or someone's put her up to it." We need to get these papers to a safe place. They hurried back to the village, taking a winding path through the fields to avoid being followed. At Miss Marple's cottage, they spread the documents on the dining table, the locket placed beside them like a silent witness. This contract could ruin the Hargrove name if it got out in 1925, Miss Marple mused. Charles's fraud, Edward's flight hits, all connected. But how does it tie to your aunt's death? Eliza frowned, turning the photographs over in her hands. If Reginald found out about this, he might think the manor's ownership is in question. He's been so possessive about the estate. Miss Marple nodded. Or someone else knows. Someone who wanted Victoria's silence. That missing diary might hold the answer. Did she ever mention Vincent Carver? Eliza shook her head. Never. But she was private about the past. I thought it was just her personality, but now, maybe she was protecting someone. Dolly, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. Jane, do you think this Carver fellow is still alive? He could be behind all this? Miss Marple considered it. Possible, but unlikely he'd be quite old now. More likely his influence lingered, perhaps through someone connected to him. We need to learn more about this maid in the photograph and what became of Edward after he reached Canada. She tapped the contract thoughtfully. And we must be careful. Whoever was watching us in the grove won't be pleased we found this. They agreed to lock the box in Miss Marple's safe, a sturdy little contraption hidden behind a painting of roses. As evening fell, Eliza looked troubled. What's next, Miss Marple? I feel like we're stirring up ghosts. Miss Marple smiled gently. Ghosts, my dear, are just stories waiting to be told. Tomorrow, we'll visit the village archives. There may be records of Vincent Carver or this maid. I think a chat with Dr. Haydock about your aunt's death is overdue. Sometimes doctors see things others miss. As they parted for the night, the wind picked up, rattling the cottage windows. Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting untouched, her mind weaving together the threads of 1925 and 1952. The locket. The contract, the carved stone all pointed to a betrayal that had festered for decades. But whose hand had stirred it back to life, and why now? Outside, the shadows deepened, and somewhere in St. Mary Mead a secret was growing restless. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Archives. The morning was gray and damp as Miss Marple and Eliza Thornton made their way to the St. Mary Mead Village Hall, a modest stone building tucked behind the church. The air smelled of wet grass, and a faint drizzle misted their coats as they walked. The weight of the previous day's discovery, the rusted box with Edward Langley's letter, and the damning contract still heavy on their minds. Miss Marple carried her umbrella, more for habit than necessity, her sharp eyes scanning the quiet lanes. Eliza clutched her scarf, her thoughts clearly tangled with the revelations about her. Grandfather Charles's fraud, and the mysterious maid in the photograph. The village archives, housed in a small room at the back of the hall, promised answers or at least a thread to pull in the unraveling mystery of Lady Victoria's death. Inside, the archive smelled of old paper and dust, with shelves crammed, full of ledgers, parish records, and yellowed newspapers. Miss Marple greeted the clerk, Miss Hartnell, a wiry woman with a penchant for order and a memory for village gossip that rivaled her own. Good morning, Miss Hartnell, Miss Marple said brightly. We're looking into some Hargrove family history records from the 1920s. Perhaps, and anything about a Mr. Vincent Carver or a maid at Hargrove Manor. Miss Hartnell's eyebrows shot up. The Hargroves? Well, there's plenty on them. Big family. Big dramas. Let me fetch the right boxes. She bustled off, leaving Miss Marple and Eliza to settle at a worn wooden table. Eliza leaned close, her voice low. Do you think we'll find something about Edward or that maid? I can't stop thinking about that photograph. She looked so out of place. Miss Marple nodded, her fingers tapping thoughtfully. Photographs capture moments, my dear, but they don't always tell the whole story. That may be a key or a distraction. Let's see what the records say. Miss Hartnell returned with 2 cardboard boxes labeled Hargrove Estate. 1920, 1930, and St. Mary Mead Miscellany. This should keep you busy, she said, brushing dust from her hands. Mind the pages? They're fragile. They started with the estate records, flipping through brittle documents about land sales, tenant agreements, and family correspondence. Most were mundane, but one caught Miss Marple's eye. A 1925 letter from Charles Hargrove to a London solicitor, requesting advice on urgent financial matters. The letter was vague, but mentioned complications with a third party and a need to secure the estate's future. Lisa frowned. That must be Vincent Carver, the man in the contract. Father was in deep, wasn't he?
Oh.
Miss Marple agreed. Deep enough to threaten Edward Langley into leaving. But there's more to find. They found a parish register listing household staff at Hargrove Manor. In 1925, a maid named Clara Wren was employed, described as 21. From London, dismissed October 1925. The timing aligned with Edward's departure. And Miss Marple's memory stirred Reginald's offhand remark about Edward running off with a maid. Clara Wren, she murmured. Could she be the woman in the photograph? Dismissed suddenly, perhaps to cover something up. Liza's eyes widened. You think she was involved in the scandal, or knew about Charles's fraud? They turned to the newspapers, scanning issues from late 1925. A small article in the St. Mary Mead Gazette caught their attention. Local man departs for Canada amid rumors. It described Edward Langley's sudden exit, noting speculation of financial disputes with the Hargrove family, but offering no details. Another article buried in a London paper mentioned Vincent Carver, a businessman of repute linked to property investments with a reputation for ruthless deals. Not a pleasant man, Miss Marple said softly. If Charles owed him money, it explains the desperation in Edward's letters. As they dug deeper, Eliza found a faded photograph tucked inside a parish newsletter, showing a group of manor staff posing on the lawn. Among them was a young woman in a maid's uniform, her face matching the one in Edward's photograph. Clara Wren, no doubt. Her expression was guarded, her hands clasped tightly as if she knew more than she let on. Miss Marple studied the image, her mind weaving connections. Clara may have seen or heard something perhaps about Charles's dealings with Carver. If she was dismissed abruptly, it wasn't for stealing jam. Miss Hartnell, hovering nearby, overheard and leaned in. Clara Wren. Oh, I remember talk about her. A mother said she left under a cloud something about a row with young Master Charles. Some thought she was too close to Mr. Langley, but I never believed it. She moved. To London, I think, after the manor let her go. Miss Marple's eyes sparkled. Did she now? Do you know where in London? Miss Hartnell shook her head. No, but my cousin might. She's in Clapham. Loves a good story. I can write to her if you like. That would be most helpful. Miss Marple said, making a mental note to follow up. They thanked Miss Hartnell and left the archives, the drizzle now a steady rain. As they walked back to the cottage, Eliza clutched the copied pages they'd made notes on Clara Wren and Vincent Carver. What now? She asked. Clara might still be alive, but finding her could take ages. Miss Marple adjusted her. Umbrella. Patience, my dear. We'll start with Dr. Haydock this afternoon. His report on your aunt's death may hold clues, especially if something was overlooked. They arrived at Dr. Haydock's surgery, a tidy office near the village. Green, the doctor, a gruff but kind man in his 60s, welcomed them with a nod. Miss Marple, always a pleasure. And Miss Thornton, sorry about your aunt. What brings you here? Miss Marple explained their concerns about Lady Victoria's death. Mentioning the scattered papers and open window in her study. Could there have been anything unusual, Doctor? Something that didn't quite add up? Dr. Haydock rubbed his chin, fetching a file from his cabinet. Victoria Hargrove? Heart attack. August 1952. I examined her myself, found her at her desk. No signs of struggle. Pulse was gone when I arrived, but... He hesitated, glancing at Eliza. There was one odd thing. Her pupils were slightly dilated, more than I'd expect for a natural heart failure. I put it down to shock or medication, but she wasn't on anything strong. The window, yes. I noticed it was open, which was strange for a cool evening. Eliza's breath caught. You think someone was there? Not saying that, Dr. Haydock cautioned. But it niggled me. I didn't push it, told families. Don't like fuss. If you're digging, though, check her medicine cabinet. She kept a few tonics. Nothing unusual, but you never know. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. dilated pupils. An open window, these were threads worth pulling. One more thing, she added. Did you ever hear of a Clara Wren, a maid at the manor in the 20s? The doctor shook his head. Name doesn't ring a bell, but I wasn't here then. Ask old Mrs. Price Ridderleash. It's got a memory like a steel trap for village scandals. As they stepped back into the rain, Eliza looked shaken. Dilated pupils? That sounds like poisoning, doesn't it? Miss Marple patted her arm. It's possible, but let's not jump to conclusions. We need to check that medicine cabinet. And find Clara Wren. She may know what Charles and Carver were up to, and if it's tied to your aunt's death. They returned to the cottage, the documents and photographs safe in Miss Marple's handbag. Aline. The rain drummed on the windows, and the locket resting on the table seemed to gleam with new secrets. Someone in St. Mary Mead or beyond knew more than they were letting on, and Miss Marple felt the net tightening, even as the shadows grew longer. Chapter 6. The medicine cabinet. The rain had softened to a fine mist by the time Miss Marple and Eliza Thornton set out for Hargrove Manor again, their umbrellas bobbing along the muddy lane. The village of St. Mary Mead lay quiet under the gray sky, with only the occasional clatter of a milk cart breaking the stillness. Miss Marple's mind was busy, turning over Dr. Haydock's words about Lady Victoria's dilated pupils and the open window in her study. The suggestion of something amiss, perhaps poison, hung heavy, and the clue about Clara Wren, the dismissed maid, added another layer to the mystery. Eliza, clutching the locket around her neck, looked resolute but nervous, her thoughts clearly. On the medicine cabinet, Dr. Haydock had mentioned, "Do you think we'll find something incriminating?" she asked, her voice low as they neared the manor's gates. Miss Marple adjusted her scarf, her eyes scanning the hedgerows for any watchful figures. "We may, my dear, or we may find nothing at all. But small details like a bottle out of play scan speak volumes. People are careless when they're desperate." The manor loomed ahead, its red brick walls softened by ivy, though the overgrown gardens hinted at neglect. Miss Marple noted the quiet no sign of Reginald's car. But a faint light glowed in the kitchen window, suggesting Mrs. Croft was about. "We'll need to be quick," she said, "and discreet. Let's avoid Mrs. Croft if we can." They slipped through a side door, one Eliza knew from childhood visits, which led to a narrow servant's staircase. The air inside was cool and musty, the silence broken only by the creak of floorboards underfoot. They climbed to the second floor and entered Lady Victoria's bedroom, where the carved wooden box still sat on the shelf, its secrets already partially revealed. Eliza pointed to a small cabinet in the corner, painted white and tucked beside the dressing table. "That's where Aunt kept her tonics and such," she said. "She was particular about it always locked." Miss Marple examined the cabinet, its lock simple but sturdy. "Do you have a hairpin, my dear?" she asked, her tone matter of fact. Eliza blinked, surprised, but handed one over. With a deftness that belied her age, Miss Marple worked the lock, her fingers moving with the precision of long practice. "A trick I learned from a housemaid in my youth," she said with a small smile as the lock clicked open. Inside were several glass bottles, rose, water, lavender oil, a headache remedy, and a small vial labeled Digitalis tincture, prescribed by Dr. Haydock for occasional heart palpitations. Miss Marple held it up, noting the liquid level was lower than expected for a recent prescription. "Interesting," she murmured. "Digitalis strengthens the heart in small doses, but too much can stop it entirely." Eliza's face paled. "You think someone tampered with it?" Miss Marple didn't answer directly, instead uncorking the vial and sniffing carefully. A faint, bitter scent, not quite right for Digitalis, lingered. "We'll need Dr. Haydock to test this," she said, slipping the vial into her handbag. "But it's possible someone added something or replaced it." Eliza's hands trembled as she opened another drawer in the cabinet, revealing a small notebook, its pages filled with Victoria's neat handwriting. It wasn't the missing diary, but a record of her daily medications, with entries noting dates and doses. The last entry, dated the day before her death, read, "Felt odd after evening dose. Bitter taste. Doc, D. This is it," Eliza whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She suspected something was wrong. Miss Marple nodded, her expression grave. Your aunt was sharp, like you. She noticed a change, but perhaps too late. They closed the cabinet, relocking it carefully, and tucked the notebook away. As they turned to leave, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. Miss Marple held up a hand, and they froze, listening. Soft footsteps retreated, followed by the faint click of a door downstairs. Someone's here, Eliza breathed, her eyes wide. They crept to the window, peering out to see Mrs. Croft crossing the lawn toward the stables, a basket in hand. She didn't see us, Miss Marple said, but her tone was cautious. We'd best not linger. They hurried downstairs, taking the servants' exit again, and made their way to the village. The drizzle had stopped, leaving the air fresh and sharp, but Eliza's mood was heavy. If Aunt Victoria was poisoned, who would do it, Reginald? He's greedy, but murder. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Greed can push people to dark places, my dear. But we mustn't assume. No? We need to know more about Clara Wren and Vincent Carver's connections to the manor. Back at the cottage, Miss Marple brewed tea while Eliza spread out their findings. The digitalis vial, the medication notebook, and the copied archive records. Clara Wren went to London after her dismissal, Miss Marple said, sipping her tea. Miss Hartnell's cousin may help us find her, but we should also visit Mrs. Price Ridley, as Dr. Haydock suggested. She's a font of village history, especially the scandalous kind. Lisa nodded, though her thoughts seemed elsewhere. What about the document Edward hid? The contract about Charles's fraud, could someone want it badly enough to kill? Miss Marple considered this, her knitting needles pausing, possibly. If the contract surfaced, it could challenge the manor's ownership even now. Reginald might fear losing his claim, or someone else might want it for leverage. There's another angle, Clara Wren. If she knew about the fraud, she could have been a threat then and now. They agreed to visit Mrs. Price Ridley that afternoon. Hoping her memory would shed light on the maid's story, Mrs. Price Ridley lived in a tidy cottage near the church, its garden bursting with dahlias despite the season. She welcomed them with a mix of curiosity and pride, her sharp eyes taking in Eliza's locket. Hargrove business, is it? She said, pouring tea. I heard about Victoria's passing, sad, but not surprising. She kept to herself too much. Miss Marple steered the conversation to 1925, mentioning Clara Wren. Mrs. Price Ridley's face lit up with the glee of a born gossip. Oh, Clara, pretty thing, but too bold for her own good. She was sweet on Edward Langley, everyone knew it, though he only had eyes for Victoria. Charles Hargrove caught them talking one night, made a terrible scene, accused her of stealing. She was sacked the next day, poor girl. Went to London, I think, to work for some fancy family. Did she ever come back? Miss Marple asked, leaning forward. Mrs. Price Ridley frowned. Not that I know of, but there was talk years later, maybe. 35 or so, that she'd married well, some businessmen, can't recall the name. Why all this fuss about an old maid? Miss Marple smiled vaguely, just tying up loose ends for Eliza's inheritance. But her mind was racing. Clara's marriage to a businessman could link to Vincent Carver, or someone in his circle. As they left, the sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the village green. Eliza clutched the locket, her voice soft. Clara knew something, didn't she? Something worth hiding all these years. Miss Marple nodded. She may have seen more than she was meant to. If she's still alive, we need to find her. And we need to get that vial to Dr. Haydock for testing. The truth is close, Eliza, but so is the danger. They parted with a plan to meet the next day, but as Miss Marple walked home, she felt a prickle of unease. The footsteps in the manor, Mrs. Croft's watchful eyes, someone was circling closer, and the Locket's secrets were stirring a storm. Chapter 7. The doctor's verdict. The sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of amber as Miss Marple and Eliza Thornton approached Dr. Haydock's surgery once more. Air was crisp, carrying the faint tang of chimney smoke, and the streets were quiet, save for the distant laughter of children playing near the green. Miss Marple held her handbag tightly, the digitalis vial and Lady Victoria's medication notebook safely inside, their potential as evidence weighing heavily on her mind. Eliza walked beside her, the silver locket glinting at her throat, her expression a mix of hope and dread. The possibility of poison, suggested by the bitter taste noted in Victoria's final entry, and the doctor's remark about dilated pupils, had cast a shadow over their investigation. Today they hoped Dr. Haydock's analysis would bring clarity or, at least, a new thread to follow. Inside the surgery, the familiar smell of antiseptic greeted them. Dr. Haydock was at his desk, scribbling notes, but he looked up with a warm, if tired, smile. "Miss Marple, Miss Thornton, back so soon? I take it this isn't a social call?" Miss Marple returned his smile, setting the vial and notebook on the desk. "I'm afraid not, Doctor. We found this in Lady Victoria's medicine cabinet." Along with her notes, she mentioned a bitter taste in her last dose, and you noted her pupils were dilated. "Could you test this digitalis tincture? We suspect it may not be quite right." Dr. Haydock's bushy eyebrows rose as he took the vial, holding it to the light. "Digitalis, eh? Dangerous stuff if mishandled. Too much can cause heart failure, not just strengthen it." He opened the notebook, scanning Victoria's precise handwriting, and his expression grew serious at the final entry. "Bitter taste. You say, that's not typical for digitalis alone. I'll need to run a few tests. Nothing fancy, mind you. But I can check for common adulterants. Come back tomorrow morning. I'll have something for you." Liza hesitated, her voice soft. "Doctor, if it was poisoned, would it look like a natural heart attack?" Haydock nodded slowly. "Could do. Digitalis overdose mimics heart failure, nausea, dizziness, irregular pulse. Hard to spot without a proper postmortem, and we didn't. Do one seemed straightforward at the time." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind already piecing together possibilities. If the digitalis had been tampered with, someone in the Manor Reginald, Mrs. Croft, or another unknown figure had access and motive. As they left the surgery, Eliza's steps slowed. "It's poison, Miss Marple. This is bigger than I thought. Who would want Aunt Victoria dead? Why now, after all these years?" Miss Marple patted her arm. "Timing is everything, my dear. Something stirred the past. Perhaps that contract we found, or Clara Wren's story. We need to find her, and soon." Their next stop was Miss Hartnell's cottage, hoping for news from her cousin in Clapham about Clara Wren. Miss Hartnell greeted them with a brisk nod. Her parlor cluttered with knitting projects and gardening magazines. "Got a letter from my cousin this morning," she said, handing over a neatly folded page. She remembers Clara Wren says she worked as a governess in London after leaving Hargrove Manor, then married a man named Thomas Reed in 1936. He was a merchant dealt in imports, quite well off. He lived in Clapham until he died in 48. Clara's still there, widowed, keeps to herself. Here's the address. Miss Marple copied it down, her heart lifting. A living witness from 1925 could change everything. Eliza's eyes brightened. "We could go to London tomorrow, after we see Dr. Haydock. Clara might know what happened with Edward and my grandfather." Miss Marple agreed, though her thoughts lingered on the manor. We should also check the study again, quietly. If Victoria suspected her medicine was off, she might have left another clue. They thanked Miss Hartnell and stepped back into the fading daylight, the village settling into its evening rhythm. But as they passed the church, Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught a figure lingering near the Lichkeeta man in a dark coat, his face shadowed by a hat. He turned away quickly, disappearing down a side path. "Did you see that?" Eliza whispered, gripping Miss Marple's arm. "I'm sure it was Reginald." Miss Marple's lips tightened. "Perhaps. Or someone he's hired to watch us." "Hey, must be cautious, Eliza. Whoever tampered with that vial may know we're closing in." They hurried to the cottage, locking the door behind them. Over tea, Miss Marple spread out their notes. The contract proving Charles's fraud, the photograph of Clara Wren, Edward's letters, and now the suspicious digitalis. "It's a web, my dear," she said. "Charles's actions in 1925 set this in motion. Debts, threats, a lover driven away. But someone today wants that past buried, and your aunt paid the price." Eliza touched the locket, her voice steady despite her fear. "Clara might tell us who? If she saw Charles and Vincent Carver together, or knew why Edward left, it could point to the killer." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles clicking softly. "Exactly. Well, And if the vial tests positive for poison, we'll know this wasn't just about inheritance, it's about silencing the truth. They planned their trip to London, deciding to take the early train to avoid prying eyes. Miss Marple suggested bringing Dolly Bantry along for moral support, and Eliza agreed, grateful for the extra company. As night fell, the cottage felt cozy but tense, the fire crackling in the hearth. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Reginald. His charm, his quick temper, his obsession with the manor. Could he have found the contract and feared its exposure? Or was Mrs. Croft, with her guarded looks and convenient appearances, hiding a deeper role? And the man by the Locket Reginald? Or someone else entirely? Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her mind weaving connections. Clara Wren was their next lead, but the truth was like the locket itself, small, intricate, and locked tight. Until the right key turned, they retired early, knowing the next day would be long. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and somewhere in the darkness, footsteps crunched softly on the gravel path, pausing just beyond the cottage gate before fading into the night. The Locket's secrets were drawing closer to the surface, but so was the danger, and Miss Marple knew they were running out of time to unravel it all. Chapter 8. The Widow's Tale. The train to London rattled along, its wheels humming a steady rhythm as Miss Marple, Eliza Thornton, and Dolly Bantry sat in a cozy compartment. The countryside blurring past in shades of green and gray. The early morning air was chilly, and Eliza clutched a thermos of tea, her eyes fixed on the silver locket around her neck. Miss Marple, her knitting tucked in her bag, was alert despite the gentle sway of the carriage, her thoughts on Clara Wren, the former maid who might hold the key to the Hargrove family's secrets. Dolly, ever cheerful, flipped through a magazine, but kept glancing at Eliza with concern. "You're sure this Clara will talk to us, Jane?" she asked softly. "After all these years, she might not want to dredge up the past." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "People hold on to their stories, Dolly, especially when they've been wronged. Clara Wren was dismissed abruptly in 1925, likely because she knew too much. She'd talk, if only to unburden herself." Eliza nodded, though. Her expression was tense. "I just hope she knows something about Edward Langley or Vincent Carver that ties to Aunt Victoria's death. If that digitalis was poisoned, we need to know who had a reason to hurt her." They arrived at Clapham station by mid-morning, the bustle of London a sharp contrast to St. Mary Mead's quiet lanes. Clara Wren's address, provided by Miss Hartnell's cousin, led them to a neat terraced house on a tree-lined street. The door was painted a soft blue, and the small front garden bloomed with late roses. Miss Marple knocked, and after a moment, a woman in her late 40s opened the door. She had sharp features softened by age with graying hair pinned neatly, and eyes that held a cautious curiosity. "Yes," she said, her voice clipped but not unkind. "Mrs. Clara Reed?" Miss Marple asked politely. "I'm Jane Marple, and this is Eliza Thornton, Lady Victoria Hargrove's niece, and our friend Dolly Bantry. We're looking into some family history and hoped you might help, given your time at Hargrove Manor." Clara's eyes flickered at the mention of the manor, and she hesitated before stepping aside. "Come in, then. Don't get many visitors asking about those days." The parlor was modest but tidy, with lace doilies on the armchairs and a photograph of a stern-looking man, presumably Thomas Red, on the mantel. Clara offered tea, which they accepted, and as she poured, Miss Marple studied her. The woman's hands were steady, but her mouth tightened when Eliza mentioned the locket, which she wore openly. "That was Miss Victoria's," Clara said, quietly. "She never took it off back then. Always said it was from someone special." Eliza leaned forward. "Edward Langley, wasn't it? We found letters from him, and a contract about my grandfather Charles's debts to a man named Vincent Carver. You were at the manor in 1925. Do you know what happened?" Clara's cup rattled in its saucer, and she set it down, her gaze distant. "I knew Edward. Kind man. Too good for the Hargroves mess. I was just a maid, but I saw things, heard things. Charles was in trouble, always meeting shady types from London. One night I overheard him arguing with Edward in the library. Charles was furious, said Edward was meddling, threatening to expose some deal with Carver." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles still in her lap. And Carver? Did you ever see him? Clara's lips thinned. Once tall, cold eyes, always in a sharp suit. Came to the manor late one evening, summer of 25. Charles gave him papers looked like a contract. After that, Edward started acting strange, scared. Then Charles caught me listening at the door, accused me of stealing, sacked me on the spot. I knew it was to keep me quiet. Liza's voice was soft but urgent. Did you know about a document? Edward hid. Something about Charles's fraud? Clara hesitated, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. I didn't know for sure, but Edward told me once he had proof of Charles's lies, something that could ruin the Hargroves. He said he'd hidden it where no one would look. I left for London soon after, got work as a governess, then married. Thomas, he was kind to Delton Imports, but he had ties to Carver's Circle Small World. London is? When I heard Miss Victoria died, I wondered, but I didn't dare come back. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. Wondered what, Mrs. Reed? Clara looked away, her voice barely a whisper. If someone found that proof, Miss Victoria was stubborn. She wouldn't let the past go. If she dug it up, someone might have wanted her silenced. Elisa gasped. You think she was murdered? Clara met her gaze. I don't know. What? But Charles had enemies, and so did Carver. That contract surfaced. It had stirred trouble, legal or worse. Dolly, who had been quiet, spoke up. Did you ever hear from Edward after he left for Canada? Clara shook her head. Not directly. A friend in service said he wrote to Victoria for a while, then nothing. Some said he died out there. Others said he started over. I always thought he loved her too much to stay away forever. Miss Marple filed this away, her mind turning to the photograph of Clara at the manor, her guarded expression. One last thing, she said. Did anyone else at the manor know about Charles's dealings? The housekeeper, perhaps? Clara's eyes flickered. Mrs. Croft? She was young then, a kitchen maid. She saw plenty, but kept her head down. Loyal to the Hargroves, though especially Charles. If she's still there, she'd protect the family name, no matter what. Miss Marple nodded, the pieces clicking. Into place. Mrs. Croft's watchful demeanor. Her quick appearances at the manor loyalty could hide guilt as easily as innocence. They thanked Clara and left, promising to keep her name out of their inquiries. As they walked back to the station, Eliza clutched the locket tightly. She confirmed that Charles's fraud drove Edward away, and that contract is dangerous. But how does it connect to Aunt Victoria's death? Miss Marple's expression was thoughtful. Someone feared what Victoria knew or what she might have found. If that digitalis was poisoned, we'll know soon. Mrs. Croft, we need to watch her closely. The train ride back was quiet, each woman lost in thought. The London skyline faded into fields, and Miss Marple's mind wove together Clara's story, the contract, and the Locket's warning of betrayal. Back in St. Mary Mead, they'd check with Dr. Haydock about the vial, but the net was tightening. Someone Reginald, Mrs. Croft, or a shadow from the past, was desperate to keep. The Hargrove secrets buried, Miss Marple felt the weight of their gaze as surely as the Locket's cold silver against Eliza's skin. Chapter 9. The Poisoned Trutha. Morning sun struggled through heavy clouds as Miss Marple and Eliza Thornton hurried toward Dr. Haydock's surgery in St. Mary Mead. The village waking slowly around them, the cobbled lanes glistened from overnight. Rain and the air carried a chill that matched the unease in Eliza's eyes. The silver locket hung heavy around her neck, secrets now intertwined with Clara Wren's revelations about Charles Hargrove's fraud and Edward Langley's flight. Miss Marple's handbag held the medication notebook, its final entry about a bitter taste haunting their thoughts. Dr. Haydock's test of the digitalis vial loomed large if it was poisoned. Lady Victoria's death was no accident, and the killer was closer than ever, inside the surgery. Dr. Haydock greeted them with a grave nod, his usual warmth tempered by the task at hand. Miss Marple, Miss Thornton, I've done the tests, he said, gesturing to a small workbench where the Vial sat beside a few chemical bottles. Sit down. This isn't simple. Eliza perched on the edge of a chair, her hands clasped tightly, while Miss Marple stood calmly, her sharp eyes fixed on the doctor. What did you find? She asked, her voice steady but expectant. "Hey, Doc." Held up the vial, its amber liquid catching the light. "Digitalis is labeled, but there's something else, belladonna, a small but dangerous amount. It's a poison, causes dizziness, dilated pupils, and can stop the heart, especially mixed. With digitalis, Victoria's symptoms, bitter taste, collapse fit perfectly." Eliza gasped, her hand flying to the locket. "So she was murdered?" Haydock hesitated. "Can't say for certain without a post-mortem, but this vial wasn't tampered with by accident."
Us.
Someone added belladonna, knowing what it would do. Miss Marple's mind raced, weaving together the threads of 1925 and 1952. "Belladonna's not hard to come by," she said thoughtfully. "It grows wild in some gardens, or it's in certain tonics, but access to Victoria's medicine." Cabina Eliza's voice trembled. "Mrs. Croft, she manages the household, brings in supplies. And Reginald, he's been staying at the manor." "But why would they?" Miss Marple patted her hand. "Motive, my dear. The contract we found proves Charles's fraud, which could challenge the manor's ownership. If Victoria found it, or if someone thought she had, they might have acted. To keep it buried, we thank Dr. Haydock, who promised to keep the vial locked away in case the police needed it." As they stepped into the damp morning, Eliza's face was pale. "Murder, Miss Marple. It's real now. What do we do?" Miss Marple adjusted her hat, her expression resolute. "We confront the manor again, but carefully. Mrs. Croft knows more than she's said, and Reginald's too quick to dismiss the past. We need to search Victoria's study for anything we missed. Perhaps a note about the contract or Clara Wren." They headed to Hargrove Manor, the sky darkening with the threat of more rain. The manor's gates creaked as they entered, and Miss Marple noted the absence of Reginald's car, another stroke of luck, though she trusted it less each time. Mrs. Croft answered the door, her apron dusted with flour, her eyes narrowing slightly. At their arrival, back again, Miss Elisa and Miss Marple. "The place is quiet today. Mr. Reginald's in London on business." Miss Marple smiled politely. "Just a quick visit, Mrs. Croft. We'd like to look through Lady Victoria's study, if you don't mind. Some papers for the estate." Mrs. Croft hesitated, then nodded, leading them to the study. The room was as they'd last seen it, bookshelves, lined with dusty tomes, the desk cluttered with ink bottles and scattered papers. Miss Marple's eyes swept the space, noting a faint scratch on the desk's edge, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. "Eliza, check the drawers again," she said softly. "Look for anything recent, notes, letters, anything Victoria wrote before she died." Eliza nodded, rifling through the desk while Miss Marple examined the bookshelves, her fingers brushing. Over spines for hidden compartments, Eliza pulled out a small envelope, unsealed, tucked beneath a blotter. Inside was a single sheet dated a week before Victoria's death, in her elegant script. "Found the box in the grove. Edward's truth must come out. I owe him that. But R is watching, must be careful." Eliza's breath caught. "Our Reginald?" She knew about the contract. Miss Marple's lips tightened, or suspected. She was piecing it together, just as we are. "This note suggests she found Edward's hidden box before we did." A soft thud from the hallway made them freeze. Miss Marple motioned for silence, and they crept to the door, peering out. The corridor was empty, but a curtain fluttered by an open window, as if someone had just slipped through. "We're not alone," Miss Marple whispered. They hurried to finish their search, finding nothing else of note, and left the study. Locking the door behind them, Mrs. Croft was in the kitchen, humming as she kneaded dough, but her glance was sharp when they passed. "Find what you needed?" she asked, her tone too casual. "Quite, thank you," Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. But as they left the manor, she felt a chill. Someone had been there, listening, and the open window echoed the night of Victoria's death. Back at the cottage, they spread out the note beside the other clues: the contract, Clara's photograph, the locket. "Reginald's in London today," Eliza said, her voice tense. "Could he have poisoned the digitalis before he left?" Miss Marple nodded slowly, or Mrs. Croft, protecting the family name. Her loyalty to Charles in 1925 might extend to his son now, but we need proof, not guesses. They planned to confront Mrs. Croft the next day, gently, to gauge her reactions. Miss Marple also suggested writing to Clara Wren again, asking about any visitors to the manor in Victoria's final days. "Someone stirred this up," she said, her knitting needles clicking softly. "The contract, the poison, it's all tied to Edward's truth. We're close, Eliza, but the closer we get, the more dangerous it becomes." As night fell, the cottage felt like a fortress, but outside, the wind carried whispers of secrets long buried, and Miss Marple knew the final truth was waiting, just beyond the next shadow. Chapter 10. The Locket's final secret. The morning broke over St. Mary Mead with a rare clarity, the sun casting long rays across the dew-soaked fields as if nature itself sensed the resolution drawing near. Miss Marple and Eliza Thornton sat in the cottage, the silver locket gleaming on the table beside the damning evidence, Edward Langley's contract, Lady Victoria's note, the poisoned digitalis vial, and Clara Wren's photograph. The pieces of the puzzle: Charles Hargrove's fraud, Edward's flight, and Victoria's murder pointed to a truth buried for decades, but now it was time to confront the shadows. Miss Marple's eyes were sharp, her knitting set aside as she outlined their plan. "We'll return to Hargrove Manor today, Eliza, speak with Mrs. Croft, her reactions yesterday, and Clara's hint about her loyalty to Charles. Suggests she knows more than she's let on. But we must be gentle. Truth comes easier when people feel safe." Lisa nodded, her fingers brushing the locket. "What about Reginald? If he's back from London, he'll be suspicious." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "Let him be. His nervousness will tell us as much as Mrs. Croft's words. I've asked Dolly to join you. Sue's a distraction no one can resist." They set out for the manor, joined by Dolly Bantry, whose cheerful chatter masked the tension in the air. The manor's red brick walls loomed as they approached,
How many?
and Miss Marple noted Reginald's car in the driveway complication. But not unexpected, Mrs. Croft opened the door, her face a mask of polite surprise. "Miss Eliza, Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, quite the party. Mr. Reginald's in the library, if you're here for him." Miss Marple smiled. "Actually, we'd love a word with you, Mrs. Croft, about Lady Victoria's last days. May we sit in the parlor?" Dolly launched into a story about the village fete, steering Mrs. Croft toward the cozy room while Eliza and Miss Marple exchanged a glance. The housekeeper's hands fidgeted with her apron, a telltale sign of unease. In the parlor, Miss Marple began gently. "Mrs. Croft, you've been with the Hargroves for years, haven't you? Since the 1920s, I believe." Mrs. Croft nodded, her eyes wary. "Started as a kitchen maid in 23. Stayed on after. Loyal to the family. I am." Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soft. "Loyal to Charles Hargrove, too, I imagine. We've learned about his troubles in 1925 debts to a man named Vincent Carver, contract that could have cost the manor. You were there when Clara Wren was dismissed, weren't you?" Mrs. Croft's face paled, and she glanced toward the door, where footsteps echoed faintly. "Reginald? Likely listening?" "I don't know much," Mrs. Croft said quickly. "Clara was trouble, always eavesdropping. Master Charles had to let her go." Liza spoke up, her voice steady. "But you knew about the contract, didn't you? And Edward Langley's proof of Charles's fraud. Aunt Victoria found it, and someone poisoned her digitalis to keep it quiet." Mrs. Croft's hands trembled, and she sank into a chair. "Never meant harm," she whispered. "Miss Victoria was good to me, but she was found that old box in the grove. Talking about clearing Edward's name, Mr. Reginald overheard her, got furious, said the family name couldn't take. Another scandal." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Did Reginald tamper with her medicine?" Before Mrs. Croft could answer, the door swung open, and Reginald stood there, his face flushed with anger. "What's this nonsense?" he snapped. "Accusing me now. Aunt Victoria died of a heart attack. Dr. Haydock said so." Miss Marple stood, her presence calm but commanding. "Not quite, Mr. Thornton. The digitalis in her cabinet was laced with belladonna. We have her note, too. She knew about the contract, about your father's fraud. You feared she'd expose it, didn't you? Ruin your claim to the manor." Reginald's jaw tightened, but his eyes betrayed panic. You've got no proof. That contract's ancient history means nothing now. Eliza stepped forward, holding up the locket. It meant enough to kill for. Aunt Victoria wanted the truth out, for Edward's sake. You couldn't let that happen. Mrs. Croft sobbed softly, her voice breaking. I didn't know he'd go that far. He asked me for belladonna, said it was for the garden, to kill pests. I got it from the apothecary, but I swear I didn't know he'd use it on her. Reginald lunged toward the door, but Dolly, surprisingly swift, blocked his path, her cheerful demeanor gone. Not so fast, young man. The police will want a word. Miss Marple had already sent a note to Inspector Craddock that morning, suspecting the confrontation might escalate. As if on cue, the sound of a car crunching on the gravel driveway signaled his arrival. Reginald's shoulders slumped, his charm crumbling as the reality sank in. Inspector Craddock entered, solid figure in a tweed suit, and listened as Miss Marple laid out the evidence: the poisoned vial, Victoria's note, the contract, and Mrs. Croft's confession. Reginald, cornered, muttered denials, but offered no defense. I just wanted the manor, he admitted finally, his voice low. Father's shame would have ruined everything. Creditors could have claimed the estate even now. Aunt Victoria was going to tell everyone. Mrs. Croft, tears streaming, added, I thought I was protecting the family like I did for Charles. I'm so sorry, Miss Elisa. Craddock took Reginald into custody, and Mrs. Croft agreed to testify, her loyalty to the Hargroves finally broken by guilt. As the police car drove away, Eliza stood in the manor's hall, the locket in her hand. It's over, isn't it? She said softly. Miss Marple nodded, her expression kind. The locket's secret is out, my dear. Edward's truth is clear, and your aunt's justice is served. You can wear it now, not as a burden, but as a memory of her courage. They stepped outside, the sun breaking through the clouds, casting light on the manor's ivy-covered walls. St. Mary Mead stretched before them, its peaceful once more, its secrets laid bare. Eliza smiled faintly, slipping the locket back around her neck. Thank you, Miss Marple. Couldn't have done this without you. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Nonsense, my dear. You've got your aunt's spirit. Now let's have tea. At the cottage it's been quite a morning. As they walked back to the village, the locket gleamed in the sunlight, its inscription no longer a warning but a testament to love and truth, finally free after decades of silence. The Hargrove mystery was solved. But Miss Marple knew the village would always hold new stories, waiting for her keen eye to unravel. Thank you for joining us on this journey through St. Mary Mead. If you enjoyed this tale of mystery and intrigue, give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more adventures, and let us know in the comments what you think Miss Marple should tackle next.